It is a great privilege, of course, to be the Minister for Education, Training and Skills, and I would like to acknowledge from the outset the tenure of the member for Morialta across the previous 4 years. I think it's fair to say that many things that occur in the education early childhood portfolios do have bipartisan support. That may not always be the perception of people in the public or the perception of people who listen to Question Time, regardless of how few do that. But I want to acknowledge his service across the last 4 years. I know he would join me in saying that I am continually impressed by the work that is happening in education and by the commitment and passion that everyone working in our education system have for making the lives of young people in South Australia better. One of the anecdotes that I've almost worn out already just in my short 3 months as being Minister Chair is that I learnt from my father, who was a teacher, that it really is a vocation, and there aren't many professions that can be described as a vocation. It is a very uncommon thing, but for many people in our teaching profession, regardless of the sector in which they teach, whether it's the public or non-government systems, to them it is a calling, and many choose to remain in the classroom, even when there is the opportunity to perhaps move into administration roles and earn more money, but they remain where they are because they are committed to the education of kids, and that's what they wanted to do with their lives. And I acknowledge that, and I want to acknowledge that more so than ever, we have asked them to go above and beyond in the last 2.5 years of the pandemic. And the other anecdote I've well and truly worn out is that I certainly felt as someone who was dropping my kids off, as many members of this place also were, during the height of the pandemic at the classroom and then tootling off to work. I felt a genuine sense of guilt that they were left to do that and stay on the front line, and I'm not passing judgment on the former government for that. That was just what had to happen to make sure our kids could get a fantastic education even through a global pandemic. But I acknowledge that they were asked to stay in classrooms educating our kids when many other people in society had the opportunity to perhaps work from home and better protect themselves from the virus. So we all owe them an enormous debt of gratitude, and I acknowledge that the effects of having operated at a much heightened state for 2.5 years, I don't think are yet to completely wash through the system, and I expect that we will see the effects of the fatigue and stress they have been under to continue for possibly a number of years, and it's something I intend to focus on as the Minister. But I want to say from the outset we thank them for their work, and this new Malinaskis Labor government is well and truly committed to education. We have all acknowledged, I think on both sides of politics, that there is no better lever for helping create active and engaged citizens in our education system. Investing in education is, of course, investing in our future. In the 22-23 budget, which we are examining today, the Department of Education comes for about $4.1 billion, reflecting the importance of education to our state. And this budget sees significant investment across the forward estimates in a number of areas. We will invest more than $320 million in capital infrastructure, including the 5 technical colleges and upgrades and expansions to other sites around the state. We'll invest in mental health and learning support in schools with 100 additional mental health and learning support specialists. We'll invest in autism lead teachers in every government primary school, and we will invest in a Royal Commission into early childhood education and care. The Commission will examine the extent to which South Australian families are supported in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, because we know how important that time is. How universal quality preschool programs for 3- and 4-year-olds can be delivered in South Australia, and how all families can have access to out-of-school hours care at both preschool and primary school ages, and do our best to make sure that the quality and accessibility of that out-of-school hours care is of a consistent level across the state, so that all parents can feel confident in using it for their children, because we know that it is an important option for many families to make sure that they are able to work, in some cases re-enter the workforce or seek more hours or change profession, and it is often a block to young working families or single parents if they can't find the care outside regular school hours in order to be able to do that. Chair, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank my departmental staff for their hard work and the changes that go with the change of government. It must be an incredibly frustrating thing for the public service to have to deal with this every 4 years, the amount of work that goes into preparing incoming government briefs for whomever party is fortunate enough to form government is a lot of work, and of course, regardless of who the victor is, one of those sets gets disposed of. So I acknowledge the very hard work that has been carried out by the people who sit around me today, but also many who are back at 31 Flinders Street and elsewhere who did that work. And of course, I want to make sure I finish by acknowledging the work of the former Chief Executive as well, Mr Rick Purse, who I think was the longest-serving Chief Executive of the Department for Education since 1977, which is a pretty remarkable feat. I think he did about 6 years, which goes to show how many changes we've had in Chief Executives, and I hope we can move away from that. But I acknowledge the former Minister for keeping Rick on after he was an appointment of the former government. He has moved on to another role. The Premier was very keen to have him in that role, and I'm very glad to have Professor Westwell in the role now. But I want to acknowledge the incredible work Rick did through a global pandemic. And he also came to the department at a difficult time and has done a lot of work, I think, to settle things down, enable the agency to get back to its core business. And I note too that I routinely, as the Shadow Minister and as a local Member of Parliament, had very positive feedback from principals in particular about Rick's work and his commitment to getting out and meeting to them and talking to them. So I want to say from the outset we thank Rick and, of course, Tammy Prabanik as well, who has joined Rick back in the Treasury in DTF. Thank them both for the incredible work they have done. I'll leave my opening statement there, Mr Chair.
The Speaker for the Opposition, the Member for Morialta.
Thank you, sir. And just very briefly in opening, can I endorse the words that the Minister said about the outstanding staff across the Department for Education and more broadly across the education system in South Australia. The 2 years of the pandemic, I think South Australia's children and young people were served extraordinarily well by our education workforce, and I reiterate my thanks to them for that hard work. Every opportunity I know that the new Minister has, and certainly that I had, we I think join in being impressed by the staff and impressed by the students and young people in South Australia for whom we are all about. Questions?
Questions? Go ahead.
Sir, I'd like to start with the technical colleges, so we'll use Budget Paper 5, page 25 as a reference if that's easiest. I know that yesterday the government has announced the location of the first of the 5 technical colleges is to be located at Findon High School, and I note that the election document states the first of the colleges will be open at the start of the 2024 school year. A few questions on this area. What will the value of the capital investment in the Findon High School Technical College be out of the $175 million?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I'm pretty sure the capital value of the build at Findon will be $35 million, because I think we accounted for an even split across the 5 sites in terms of building the 5 locations. And then there is operating money, of course, on top of that for each of the 5. But as the Chief Executive reminds me, there may be differences in each site depending on what we come up against when we do the build. So we'll work on that. But I'm pretty confident that we erred on the side of caution in terms of budgeting for how much it might cost. But yes, I think it's $35 million is what we estimated for each of the 5 sites, including Findon.
Thank you. Is the investment in the Findon High School Technical College being treated as a separate project to the existing $10 million improvements, or is this a separate build on a separate site?
We might come back to you with a more specific answer, but I know that when we budgeted in opposition, the $35 million for the tech schools was deemed to be a completely separate project from the $10 million amount that I think was committed back in 2017.
Is it planned that the capital works at the Findon High School Technical College will be complete before the start of the 2024 school year, or is it anticipated that programs will be offered while the building is still underway?
we haven't really considered whether or not, I think, Member for Morialta, if we can offer the programs while the building is underway, but we are committed to having it operational by the start of the 2024, the Technical College by the start of the 2024 school year, and we're confident we can meet that timeline.
The Technical College at Findon, what new qualifications or partnerships with business and industry will be offered by this new technical college, which were not offered previously either at Findon High School or at nearby high schools?
So at the announcement that we made yesterday, we were pleasingly joined by representatives from BAE who asked questions by the media around what kind of courses they would like to see offered at all our technical colleges, but I guess given the proximity of the Findon one to the operations of BAE, I think at Osborne and Parkes from memory, I think they were very keen to have it focusing on advanced manufacturing. So I guess, you know, skills around, I think, welding, electrotechnology, I think, is the pre-apprenticeship for someone to become a Sparky. And there are a couple of other things as well that I know BAE highlighted they would like to see offered at our technical schools in order to help them have the pipeline of work they're going to need for their projects. So I'm confident that there will be unique offerings at Findon High. Some might be the ones I just mentioned, some might be things that are already offered elsewhere, but I think this is really about providing the pathway for students to go from year 10 through, learn these skills, potentially undertake certificate 2s, and then that lead into an apprenticeship and then into the workforce. And they were the comments that were made by BAE, particularly yesterday. It was around getting people at the younger age on that path to having those trades with a view very early on from that year 10 level to the job they might find themselves in once they finish at the technical school. And I think in the mind of the Premier and myself, when we were talking about potentially making a commitment before the election on technical colleges, we were very conscious of feedback that we had both had from employers who either directly employ apprentices or RTOs or GTOs who have apprentices on the books, that more work, I think, needs to be done in terms of providing them with apprentices or trainees who are ready to fulfil that role. Not so much job ready as apprentice ready, because we know we have a bit of an issue with people dropping out. I've been alarmed, I'm sure this is feedback that the member for Morialta has had around the traps as well, by the number of employers who say they feel like they are putting increasing amount of their own time, effort and personal time, even at chief executive level, and I had a story like that from Anthony Kittle at Red Arc, that they are putting into making sure their apprentices actually finish, get all the way through. Stories ranging from calling them up to going around to their house in the morning to make sure that they're out of bed and they're coming along. So they have said that they would like to make sure that not only are we preparing people who are, I guess, job ready, and these technical colleges will do that, but preparing people who are more ready and committed to not just starting an apprenticeship but actually completing one as well.
Ask, what discussions has the Minister had with Catholic Education South Australia in relation to the establishment of the new technical college at Findon, especially given it is fairly close to the new Catholic Education Western Technical College, which accepts enrolments from all three sectors? And will the two technical colleges endeavour to be offering a complementary suite of VET programs, or will they be competing?
I don't want them to be competing, and the comments I've made, and I made these again yesterday, about why we chose the 5 locations that we did, because I did have some conversations with, I think it might have been Neil McGoran and Dennis Ralston a couple of times, and they, of course, said they wouldn't like to see the technical colleges that the government is going to build compete with theirs, and I don't want to see that either. I think it's about choice and making sure that regardless of where people live, they have the option of a technical college, which I think is proving to be a very attractive model. I think of St Patrick's Technical College in the north and the number of students from my sort of area, state area in the northeast who are choosing to go there. It's clear that parents are voting with their feet, and the principal of Findon yesterday, Kathleen Hoare, actually made comment to the media about the fact that her phone's been ringing hot already from parents asking when enrolments are going to be taken. But I've been careful to say that we tried to place them as best we could in areas that would complement the existing Catholic offerings at St Pat's, Western Technical and Cardine, so that they complement each other both in terms of their location, but I also hope they'll be able to complement each other in terms of their course offerings as well. And I've committed to working with the Catholic sector the whole way on making sure we do that. It would not be an ideal outcome in terms of expenditure of taxpayers' money, and there's a considerable amount going to these projects if we simply replicated what is happening elsewhere. But I admit and acknowledge that it is also about choice and providing like we do in the primary and secondary years, offering government and non-government options. Is there anything you want to add? I might allow Professor Westwell to add a couple of additional comments to that.
Just to say that the technical colleges are designed to be complementary with the Catholic colleges and also with the offerings from government and public schools. But also Western Technical College is a day-a-week facility, not an enrolment college. So we want to make sure that there's that capacity within the system as well.
And if I can add one very short thing, sorry, member from Morialta too. We are working with the 77 industry skills councils, and that work has already begun to speak with them about what they want to see offered at the technical college as well, to make sure that not only are we trying to complement what existing technical colleges offer, but also making sure that our skills council provide that expert advice on the courses they think are needed to meet existing skill shortages and areas of demand into the future. So we're doing that work has commenced already.
A couple of questions flow from those answers. Can I ask, given the Minister's comments about wanting to work with Catholic education and his desire that they not be competing, is the Minister or the Government open to talking to Catholic education about, indeed, especially given the Western Technical College accepts enrolments from all sectors, is the Government open to working with Catholic education towards a joint marketing exercise, or indeed the collaboration in identifying pathways for students who might be interested in the offerings at either Western Technical College or the Findon Technical College?
That's a very good question, and I think my answer would be yes. I think we'd be open to that. I want to maximise these. I don't want us to build 5 technical colleges at a cost of $208.8 million and not get the results that we need. And I gave my commitment to both Dennis Ralph and Mr McGorran, both as a Shadow Minister and now as a Minister, that's what I want to achieve. And I have an enormous amount of respect, in particular, for St Patrick's Technical College. Danny out there goes to absolutely everything. As the Chair would know, the amount of work he does in his community to build awareness of the technical college and support the kids to go there. And I'll be honest and say that it was St Pat's was my inspiration for really backing this in hard, and I think the Premier's as well. So it's a very good question of the members, and yes, we are open to that is my answer.
Thank you. And partly flowing from the Chief Executive's answer, what will be the governance model for these new entities? Are all 5 going to have a similar governance model, or are you going to have bespoke models at each of them? Are they going to be, for example, integrated within Findon High School, or is it a separate institution to be co-located with Findon High School?
I'll make some remarks, and then I think Professor West will too. We're looking at those models right now because there are different models of how we do that. I think we are open to different ideas in terms of how we do it, in terms of whether they are standalone institutions that the students enrol in, or whether they are at a host school, so to speak, and then attend the technical college. But we're going to work through with all the stakeholders, I think, on how we best do that. But I'm happy for Professor Westwell to add.
We're going to work with communities and industry to make sure that each site is going to work best for those students and, of course, for those pathways to industry in those areas. So there'll be bespoke models for each one. As far as Findon goes, and from a Findon point of view, it'll be integrated within the school.
Can you just repeat that last bit? Sorry, I'm hard of hearing. as far as Findon goes, what did you say?
Findon will be integrated within the school.
Thank you. Well, in relation to that, will Findon High School continue to offer the broad range of curriculum offerings from years 7 to 12? The St Patrick's model that the Minister has spoken of is a year 10 to 12 senior secondary school with their technical offering. Is Findon still going to have the year 7 to 9, as it's still going to be offering a general curriculum in addition to the technical offerings, or will it be focusing exclusively on skilled and technical pathways?
It will continue to offer those as well.
How many students are anticipated to enrol in this college, which presumably then becomes a substream within the senior secondary years at Findon High School? And if a student is enrolling in this technical offering, having been at a different high school, will they continue to be a student of their original high school and also a student who is engaged in subjects at the technical college, or will they become a student of Findon High School?
So we're doing, I'm told, remember, that we're doing modelling on both scenarios. So it could be 200 FTE, or I think we had a discussion yesterday where it could be more than that. But I think we're doing modelling on the other scenario that you pointed out about as well. So we'll have more information on that soon, I hope. But we are modelling for both those scenarios that you asked about.
Given that we're looking to have this Findon site open in 2024, and as you identified, the principal at Findon High is already taking some phone calls, would the Minister care to put a date on when we'll know that governance model by, and in relation to what the experience is for students at the school?
I'm not going to put a date on it, Member for Morialta, but I'm happy to. I guess we will make it public as soon as we possibly can, because it was very much reinforced with me by Ms Hoare yesterday that they are fielding a lot of calls, and I anticipate the same will happen at the other sites. In fact, I think the member for Mount Gambier said the same thing to me when I was down there for Country Cabinet, that he's already getting queries about when students might be able to enrol.
The Education Department website says that the technical colleges will, and I quote, accept enrolments from public and private schools. If they are from non-government schools, is it, I appreciate the Minister's immediate last answer suggests that potentially accepting enrolments from those schools means that they accept the enrolment and then they cease to be a student at the other school. But if the model were to be the other version that the government is considering, where it is an enrolment at the technical college for certain subjects, but still the original school maintains the enrolment as well, is it anticipated the non-government school will be charged for whatever course is being undertaken, or will it be a free offering to all students?
Well, they're all issues that we're working through at the moment, but I think, do you want to say something about how it could work if... I might pass over to Professor Westfall because he has some thoughts on how it might work in terms of if the student is enrolled, for instance, at a non-government school but wants to seek access to the technical college, which is very much what I would like to see without cannibalising the existing Catholic offering, I might add.
So there is that opportunity for students to move from one school to the school that's hosting a technical college, and for the enrolment to shift. But we're exploring similar arrangements that we have at the moment for accessing VET, where if somebody from one sector is working with another sector, we work on those financial arrangements together. We want to make sure that the capacity's there in the system.
Will the new technical college at Findon be registered with ASCOR as an RTO?
Advice on that?
No.
I'm going to take that on notice, please, Member.
And in that case, can I also ask whether the Minister or the Government has any further information about whether any of the other 4 would also be planned to be registered as RTOs as well?
I'll take that on notice too, thank you.
Can I ask, in relation to the operating costs identified on the same line, 30 million... Sorry, I think the election promise was 30 million. I think on page 25 it's slightly more than that. It's about 33 million, 34 million. Will those 34 million in operating costs for the colleges be split evenly once they're all operational? How much, and will it all go to the colleges, or is it intended that a section be retained by head office?
Thank you, Member. Yes, the amount is 33.8 in operating costs being provided across 3 years. We did that with when we committed in our pre-election budget costings on the assumption that it would be, I think, roughly equal. But as we said, I think, in terms of our answer to your similar question about capital costs for each of the 5, we will work closely on each specific site in terms of what we think it needs to look like to best meet the needs of that community, given that we have 2 regional sites as well, which will have potentially more specific or different needs in terms of the courses that it needs to offer. And we'll see whether or not the 33.8 is split evenly, or whether or not it will be different for each of the 5.
And the other part of the question was whether head office will be taking a share for whatever the program management is required, or whether all of this funding is going to the schools.
I'm told there is potentially a very small amount, potentially, but our intention is to get the absolute vast majority of that directly into those schools. So I guess my answer to you in short is hopefully not, but we shall see.
Noting that the operating expenses are set to grow to $21 million in the 25-26 year, will that be the ongoing annual operating budget for this program across the 5 technical colleges? Or is it indeed scheduled to grow larger than that in the 26-27 year?
I might pass over to Professor Westwell, but I guess, again, somewhat in line with how we've answered those previous questions, we will see as time progresses in terms of what the budget needs to be. I'm not going to foreshadow or guess how it might change outside the forward estimates, but Professor Westwell might like to, or Mr Bernardi.
Certainly will be recurrent expenditure, but we'll have a look at that depending on how we, as technical colleges, bed in, making sure that they can add the most value to the community and to industry. So we'll look at that, but there will be recurrent expenditure, absolutely.
In relation to this operating expenditure, is that eligible to be applied as part of South Australia's state government contribution to meet our obligations under the National School Funding Agreement, and is therefore already part of the global education budget, or is this new money?
We would see it's related to school education.
I might allow Professor Westwell to make a few remarks on that.
So we're seeing this as being part of the school education funding, so it'll be part of the school education system.
Does that have any implications if the school's offering is, as I think Labor policy and the department's website suggests, going to be an offering available for non-government school students?
Of course, we'd have to work out, when we're working out the funding arrangements, just the compliance around what's available for funding with public education and what might need to be different for funding non-government schools.
We look forward to that. Can I ask in relation to the investing payments? I know the schedule is 15, then 50, then 70, then $40 million over the 4 years, totalling the promised 175. Was any of this funding applied from the Department for Education's as yet unallocated investing budget in later years of the forward estimates, or is this new money to the department?
I'm told it's new money to the department.
Well done. Can I ask...
It didn't come easy. Can I just say that?
Sorry?
It didn't come easy. That won't surprise you, I'm sure.
Are there any other programs within government then from which this government has been redeployed, or is this all new money to the state budget and, in total?
From the technical colleges specifically, Member Mariota? Yep. Thank you, Member Mariota. In terms of technical colleges, the investing is new money. The operating, we are prioritising from existing budget resources or existing department budget resources.
Thank you. Is that prioritisation coming at the expense of any existing programs, or is that solely out of the future growth available under the National School Funding Agreement?
Yeah, I'll say some remarks and then I might pass over to the Chief Executive or Mr Bernardi to add some more. So we are obviously prioritising the election commitments that we made, and I think the Premier has been pretty clear that that is what he wants to do. So in some cases, I'm told by the department, and as I said, I'll get the Professor or Mr Bernardi to add to this, there may be some, and I stress may be some programs which are deferred to a later budget year in order to be able to prioritise that money towards the delivery of election commitments. But we are working through that. Would one of you like to add some colour to that? So my answer is working through it now. In some cases there may be deferral of budget lines to later budget years to give us the capacity to do that and prioritise the election commitments, but I'll allow the Chief Executive to add a bit more to that.
So as you know, as a result of signing the Gonski Agreement in 2018, the Department of Education was provided with additional budget capacity, including provision for indexation. This budget capacity is reflected in the department's budget and the forward estimates, which means that, you know, we manage our financial affairs according to the education functions of the department. So from this budget...
Please speak closer to your microphone. It's very hard to hear you. Thank you.
So from this budget allocation, the department is required to meet the cost pressures, such as meeting the additional costs associated with things like the Commonwealth Superannuation Guarantee Scheme, as well as to fund new initiatives relating to education, such as the recent investment to improve internet access and speed in our schools. The approach taken is the same approach that has been adopted previously, and that is that the department uses Gonski funding to meet education initiatives that have been announced in the 22-23 state budget. So really it does all come down to priorities, and what we're doing is working through the budget priorities to make sure that we're managing those from within our budget allocations.
Can I ask when the department or the minister expects to sign off on those decisions then, if you're still working through it?
Or notice.
Thank you. Will students, trainees and apprentices who are over 18 years old and seeking to re-engage with education going to be allowed to attend these technical colleges?
My answer is it probably wasn't our initial intention, but we'll work with the individual communities, and I note that there might be, particularly at some of the regional ones, possibly greater demand for those people, I guess, trying to re-enter education at the age of 18 or over to do that, possibly in Mount Gambier or Port Augusta. And if we think that demand is there and we can find a way to do it, we will consider it. But it was not the initial intention. It was about schooling in year 10 to 12. But we're open to things that work for those communities and making sure that wherever we can, we tailor it to meet their needs instead of just having a cookie-cutter approach and providing the same thing everywhere.
Got one more question on this line. When will all 5 of the colleges be operating? My understanding is that the Labor policy document describes them as all operating before the 2026 election. Heard the Premier on radio yesterday saying at some time in 2026, will they all be completed and open before the 2026 school year?
I didn't catch the Premier's radio interview. I must call him and chastise him for his answer. I'm sure that will go down well. By the start of the 2026 school year.
I'll let him know.
Yes, thank you. I'll leave the country.
The member for Carville. Thank you. And then followed by the member for Waite.
Thank you, Mr Chair. If I can take the Committee 2 Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, at page 181, either major feasibility studies or purchase of land and property. Can the Minister please provide an update on any planned capital works to see through an additional primary school in Mount Barker, in the Mount Barker growth area?
Thank you, Member for Carville. I appreciate your question and your interest in this topic, and I think it won't come as a surprise to you or anyone else in this place that I think we have probably collectively, the last few state governments going a long way back, have probably not prioritised the growth in the Mount Barker area as we should have in a range of important areas of public policy, and that includes education as well. And I know that Mount Barker and nearby townships have experienced significant population growth, I think due largely to the rezoning of land for residential development back in 2010, and that was identified in the 30-year plan for Greater Adelaide. Over the 5 years to 2020, the Mount Barker District Council had the highest average annual population growth rate of 2.75% of any LGA within South Australia, which I think would probably actually come as a surprise to people who don't live in the area. I think it would be a surprise to people in my neck of the woods that it has crept up on us like that, and our rate of investment hasn't kept pace with that 2.75% growth. The significant population growth occurring in Mount Barker and the nearby townships and increasing market share has resulted in enrolment and capacity pressure at the existing government schools. To address this capacity pressure in the short and medium term, the Department for Education is continuing to progress a number of capacity management strategies with schools in the area in the form of additional and refurbished capacity. The 2022 Term 1 school data collection was undertaken by schools in February 2022, and the current verified enrolments for the schools listed above, including the schools that the member asked about, are as follows: Mount Barker South Primary School, 338 enrolments; Littlehampton Primary School, 363 enrolments; Nan Primary School, 398 enrolments; Harndorf Primary, 220 enrolments; Mount Barker High School, 1,003 enrolments; Oakbank Area School, 346 enrolments. And now if we compare that to enrolment predictions for those schools for the years 2023, 24, 25 and 26, as forecasted by the department, it's pretty interesting and really goes to the member's point about the pressures that are being felt there. Mount Barker South Primary, 2023, 403, which is up from 338, but by 2026, 504. Littlehampton, now 363, next year smaller growth to 365 and only up to 368 by 2026. Nan, 398, and that is planned to stay largely static to 2026. Harndorf, again, probably likely to stay fairly static from where it is at around the 220 mark now. But Mount Barker High School, currently 1,003. 2023, 1,185, and then 2026, 1,412, which I guess is where the rubber really meets the road. Oakbank Area School, pretty significant growth. We have now 346, 389 forecast for next year, and up to 421 in 2026. So these are significant figures. And in terms of the member-specific question around what the government is going to do in terms of planned capital works. In terms of Mount Barker South Primary School, to support that really considerable increase in capacity, a number of projects have been undertaken. The former community centre located on the school site was refurbished, providing additional general learning areas, which have been in use from Term 4 2020. A modular building providing additional general learning areas was provided and was operational from the beginning of the school year. At Littlehampton, in August 2020, due to capacity demand, additional accommodation in the form of a new 2-classroom modular building was provided to the approximate value of $653,655. That was obviously his projects with the former minister. Although Littlehampton Primary School had sufficient toilet access across the school, the principal requested, and with Governing Council support and approval, there was an additional almost $51,000 for student toilets to be built at the western end. I don't think capital works planned at Nan or Harndorf. Mount Barker High received 6.3 for major upgrades, which included new contemporary learning areas, removal of transportable buildings to remove asbestos, new performing arts studio and learning areas, refurbishment for administration, significant refurbishment of outdated learning areas. Also received additional accommodation to the value of about $1.8 million to support the school in managing the increase in student growth, which, as I said before, is really significant. A new modular building was also provided to the school as part of the Year 7 to High School special options program to the value of 1.5, increasing the number of special classes available there. Oakbank Area School has had some works underway there to provide disability access provisions. The project is delivered in 2 stages. Stage 1 will provide the immediate needs of a compliant disability toilet, accessible general learning area space and external access ramp to Building 1. That expenditure date is $727,000, expected to be delivered by the end of August, so not far away. Stage 2 is in planning. That will involve improving access to serviced learning areas and lift access to the 2nd storey of the main admin building. Estimate of that cost is $750,000. Aged surplus buildings are in the process of being removed from the site, including the removal of contaminated soil as per EPA guidelines. We know that never comes cheap. Total expenditure to date is $335,000. That's expected to be complete by the end of this month. Mount Barker Primary, the school received $11 million for major upgrades, including a new 2-storey building comprising general learning areas and serviced learning areas for STEM, a new disability unit, new administration facilities, general building amenities, including toilet facilities and lift access on all the floors, a new landscape courtyard for open play and circulation, and demolition of ageing infrastructure. The final work scheduled for completion late August. Now, I guess that paints a picture of what the pressures are, and they're obviously really significant, and work that has been done, a lot of which was done, I note, by the former government. I guess what I can say to the members specifically about what we are planning on doing, though, is we are looking very closely at that modelling around what needs to be provided for the long term for your community, member for Carville. I guess I'll finish my answer by saying very much aware of the pressures in excruciating detail, and I note your advocacy, and I hope that it is something that the Malinaskis Labor government can do in this term to have a long-term solution instead of what successive governments, both Labor and Liberal, have done, which is try to respond in an ad hoc kind of fashion to continually hitting that cap. So I hope to have some news for you, and appreciate the question.
Well, thank you, Minister, for that very comprehensive and detailed answer. It's sincerely appreciated. Chair, I have some additional questions in relation to TAFE, but they may better be ventilated in the forthcoming session.
That answer, if I can have one supplementary. Okay. The Minister identified that there was a watching brief on the Mount Barker area for potential need for future infrastructure investment. Are there any other geographical areas where the Department is keeping a close eye on the potential need for future infrastructure investment, and if so, what are they?
Yes, thank you, member. My short answer, member for Morialta, is the outer north. I am told by the department has again, and I know that's been the case for some years, identified as a real pressure area. I know the department keeps watch across all areas of the state in terms of what projected enrolment figures are, but I think outer north is an area of concern. Speaking now as a local member, and I have no plans in this area, but I note local schools in the northeast as well. A lot of those are rapidly approaching their capacity. I think a number of them, some I think in the area for the first time ever, are not taking out of zone enrolments. So that's another example, and the examples are myriad, but I think outer north. Are there any other areas that you would? No, that's a problem. Yeah. Outer north is my short answer to you.
Page 25, budget measures autism support in schools. Can the Minister advise the committee how the autism lead teachers will support improved outcomes in primary schools?
I thank the member for Waite for her excellent question, and I'm pleased to have seen her interest in education early in her term as the member for Waite, and I'm pleased to advise the chamber that we have made a pretty considerable election commitment in this respect, and that is in regard to autism lead teachers in all our public primary schools. Chair, could I say from the outset, I know that if the Premier were here, he would agree that we were both staggered, and I suspect probably the member for Morialta would agree with me on this one, staggered by the number of parents who would come up to us at all manner of community events, weekend sport, a school production on a weeknight, email, social media, talking about the struggles they were having in terms of getting support with their child who is on the spectrum. We were genuinely overwhelmed by the number of people who were raising that with us in opposition. So we turned our mind pretty quickly to what we could offer if we were fortunate enough to win the state election, and we started that process by hosting a range of community forums that the Premier attended, I attended, the Minister for Human Services attended, local members attended as well, I think, and some stakeholders as well, where we sat down. I think the member for Badco might have been at some of those as well, where we literally sat around in a circle and allowed parents of kids with autism to speak about their experiences and about what kind of support they felt they needed to have more positive experiences in our education system and to feel like their kids were getting the quality of education that they were promised. So that was the genesis of the announcement for the lead teachers, and I want to acknowledge the work that the Deputy Premier did on this, who is has a huge policy brain, but we really tasked her in no small way with going away and I guess getting into the granular detail from those forums and then trying to turn it into something practical that would really help. And I was really, as we, of course we always are, but particularly in this one, in making an offering that didn't just tick the box in terms of being able to say to the South Australian public before the election that yes, we've got a policy on autism, but actually focusing on doing something that if we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to actually implement it, would make change. And that's how we landed on lead teachers. And at the end of 2021, there were nearly 5,000 students with an autism diagnosis in mainstream schools who received additional funding. Students with a diagnosis of autism may have co-occurring diagnoses such as intellectual disability, physical or sensory impairments, or a medical condition such as diabetes or epilepsy. And we know, Chair, and members of this place will know that those kids are unfortunately all too often overrepresented in the data about kids who are excluded from school. And we've seen that in successive reports. It is not particular to South Australia, it is occurring globally. And we know that schools are also crying out for assistance in wanting to be able to offer a better quality education and more support to those kids. I feel for the SSOs, classroom teachers, support workers who are there to offer that extra assistance to often kids with autism in mainstream schools, and often they are incredibly frustrated and feel let down that they don't have the support around them to be able to do that, because at the end of the day they are the ones who bear the brunt from parents. It's not politicians like myself who get to make these decrees in ivory towers. It's people out in the field who have to wear the ramifications of a lack of support, and I acknowledge the work that those people do. So we announced lead teachers for all of our public primary schools, including reception to Year 12 schools, and what we envisage the role of that lead teacher will be is to provide support to their colleagues at the school on how to best support and educate students with autism. To be a point of, and I was really firm that this needed to be part of the role, because this was recurring feedback that we got at the forums, to be a point of contact for parents, carers and teachers, because the thing that I heard almost more than anything else from parents was that they didn't know where to go. They'd speak to one person at the school who would pass them on to someone else, who might pass them on to the regional education office or the education director, or you might end up talking to an MP. And I don't push and blame for that. I think it is just a symptom of the system being stressed and not having the resources in there to actually allow someone to focus on the role of being the contact for that parent to say, I understand the issues you've raised, I understand the urgency in us doing something about this. I can be the person you speak to on these matters. We can sit down face to face and talk about your child's education. And I guess the third broad point is to drive autism policy and practice that works best for their school. So the Autism Lead Teacher commitment is part of an overarching plan for students with autism, which also committed to seeking to increase the number of autism qualified staff in preschools. I work with service providers, including Autism SA, to offer early intervention services in children's centres, develop a state autism strategy that operates with the State Disability Inclusion Plan and require all government agencies to sign up to the Autism Friendly Charter, an initiative of Autism SA, and I note their advocacy in this area, and investing $50 million to fund 100 additional speech pathologists, occupational therapists, psychologists and counsellors for the public school system, although I note that providing the money is not so much the challenge in that area as it will be making sure we find the people to fill those roles. This commitment is about putting resourcing directly in the hands of primary schools. The cost that we have put towards this is largely accounted for by backfilling the teachers who will perform the role of lead autism teacher. So there is, of course, someone in the classroom teaching kids while that person goes away and performs all these really important roles. And no doubt, and I know members in this place will know, the parents who have kids on the spectrum who are really, I guess, struggling to get the support they need are also incredibly stubborn is not a fair word. They are what enthusiastic is a better word, because they are doing what any parent would do, and I commend them for that, but they ain't going away when they come to you and ask for help, and that will mean a lot of phone calls and meetings for the lead teacher, but it's something that needs to happen. They need to be heard. We need to offer support to the school so that I guess it's not classroom teachers who have a number of students with autism in mainstream schools who are continually diverted away from that duty to try to offer that additional support, but we have someone else on site who can do it. I thank the member for the question.
Thank you, sir. I'll go to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 186. The highlights refer to the Vet for School Students policy. Is the government going to maintain the model of flexible industry pathways created under the former government?
Thank you, member. Listen, the advice that I've had from the department very early in the piece is that we think these are positive. The flexible industry pathways are a positive change, and I think I am trying to take an approach as Minister, I will say, not unlike the attitude of the former Minister, to not come in with a flamethrower and vindictively burn everything to the ground that was done by the last mob, because that doesn't serve anyone. And I haven't done that, and I don't intend on doing that. And I think, given the feedback I've got from the agency around this, that we think it is positive. Our intention is to keep it. All I would say is that we probably just want to look at it in terms of how it will interface with things like the technical colleges to make sure it all comes together cohesively. But Professor Westwell, I think, wants to add a few extra words to that as well.
Yeah, just to say, to build on what's gone on in the past, were the quality courses connected to industry and the demands of industry, because we know those pathways are important for our students. So retaining that focus on quality and connection to pathways into South Australian industries, absolutely.
In relation to the policy, there were, in addition to the flexible industry pathways, and I thank the Minister for the answer and indeed its content, there was some other enabling work that was done to support the flexible industry pathways, and I'm going to run through a few examples. You can answer as many of them as you like. The embedding of VET in years 7 to 10, for example, the World of Work Challenge, the Student Pathways website and its associated e-portfolio, and indeed the career counselling strategy work that was announced at the beginning of this year. Is the government going to continue those strands of the Vet for School Students policy as well?
thank the member for the question, and I can say from the outset that I've certainly had no conversations with anyone around ceasing any of that activity. And as I said in answer to the previous question, if I'm told by the department that we think it's working, then I think that I would accept their advice. But I guess also in line with what I said before, given that we are building these 5 technical colleges, I want to make sure that the offerings that you just mentioned are interface in nicely with that and work in well, but I don't anticipate that we're coming in there to remove those programs. Certainly no, I've had no discussions of that nature with the department.
How many school-based apprentices and trainees are there currently?
I think we have got that. Now, I think I saw that figure somewhere in my 10,000 brief, so give me a... I've got this. We might take it on notice, but I can tell you that to date in 2022, over 4,000 government school students have commenced VET pathways, including school-based apprenticeships or traineeships. But I'll take your specific question on notice and come back to you with an answer.
And this may be added to the on notice. What is the government's target for numbers of school-based apprentices and trainees in the years to come?
Well, yes, we'll take that on notice as well. Thank you.
The Minister answered earlier, or maybe it was the Chief Executive, that I think we were expecting 200 students to be enrolled at the new Findon High School Technical College. I'm wondering if there is a target or a KPI for how many additional trainees and apprentices are anticipated to be engaged through the new technical colleges over and above those who would have been undertaking this pathway through the original schools.
Thank you, Member. I'll say that, as I think I said in my answer to that earlier question, it may be 200 depending on the model that we choose. In terms of a target, I envisage that we will have one, but we don't have that yet. But when we get to that point, I'll happily speak about that in greater detail.
And one more in this area. There was a Defence, Space and Cyber Careers Expo established last year as part of this body of work. Will that be continuing in this year and in future years?
I think no decision has been made either way. Certainly there's been no directive or anything from me. And I'm confident that similar will take place at the very least, if not the same. But no indication has been given by me or anyone else that wouldn't be the case.
Thank you. Can I move to page 188, expenses, which covers a great many things. Can the Minister advise the House whether the new government will continue the program of works identified in the Department's response to the Graham report into suspensions, exclusions and expulsions, including the $15 million commitment within the Department's budget?
I might let Dr. Crozer-Barlow come and make some comments on that, as she's expert on the matter.
Yes, so the program of works is planned to continue, including the $15 million allocation. We have extended the time period over which that $15 million allocation will be allocated, so it's going out to 2 further years, which will enable us to trial the Positive Behaviour for Learning program, which was a big part of that initiative. That will enable that to run an additional 2 years in that process. So the program of work is continuing. We're also looking to see the impact of some of the new commitments, particularly in relation to autism lead teacher. We are really interested to see the impact on that in relation to ARTA 2 exclusions, which you know was a particular area of focus of the Graham Review. And we know that students with autism are overrepresented in that exclusionary, in those exclusions in those early years. And we are going to be tracking really closely whether the introduction of an autism lead teacher in every primary school will impact on those exclusionary disciplines. So the answer is yes.
Can I ask what the original time frame for that expenditure of $15 million was going to be?
Yes, my understanding is it was over the 4 years into 27, 20. Can I just confer with my learned CFO colleague? Yeah, we'll take it on notice, but I'm pretty sure it was 4 years, and we've just rolled it out into 2 years beyond the 4 years.
And then can I also ask, in the new program of expenditure that is anticipated for that $15 million, what is the annual expenditure expected in each of the now 6 years that this program of response is coming?
We'll take that on notice.
Is the government maintaining, or is the department maintaining the responses to each of the recommendations that were initially provided under the former government, or is the new government changing any of the proposed responses?
I might allow Dr. Croser-Barlow to answer this one.
As I recall, there were 2 responses to the Professor Graham report. In the first instance, the former government released an interim response which provided, in principle, responses to each of the individual recommendations. As you may recall, there were a number of recommendations, a very large number of recommendations, and in the subsequent statement that the former minister made to the Parliament, that was distilled into the $15 million commitment, which identified, from memory, 5 to 6 key areas of work for progressing in relation to the Graham Review. And those 5 to 6 key areas of work remain the focus areas of the work program going forward.
Member for Murray-Elton, and thank Dr. Croser-Barlow for her answer, is that I fully appreciate the importance of this work, and it is something that is raised with me by principal associations regularly, and I think I can say schools that probably have a disproportionate number of people who may have been in the flexible learning options program about the importance to get this piece of work right. That will come as no surprise to you. I'm sure you feel exactly the same way. But it is a big body of work. I want to make sure that we get it right, because no doubt whatever the model we end up with, we will be, for better or worse, stuck with for some time. So conscious of its importance and committed to making sure that we liaise with all those stakeholders in terms of getting something that isn't just decided to be the best option by ministers or departments, but also what is decided to be or thought to be the best model by teachers and leaders and the ones who actually have to use whatever it is we put in place of flow.
Thank you. My recollection is that one of the early initiatives planned under this body of work was professional development opportunities for teachers in mainstream settings to enhance their inclusive education practice. So I might be misstating that slightly, I might be using the wrong language, but maybe I can ask, are there any professional development opportunities that are coming out of this body of work that are planned to be rolled out?
Go for it, Dr. Croser-Barlow.
So the elements that were to be included in this body of work were the school-wide positive behaviour for learning, which we were implementing into 40 schools. Is that the particular
yes, that's
one that
what
you're
I was thinking
referring to?
of.
Excellent, sorry. So yes, that is still commencing. So we've begun recruitment of schools for the early implementation of that, recognising that COVID has that we are mindful of not adding additional workload to schools during this time of COVID, but our target is still to have 40 schools trained in the intensive management of positive behaviour for learning over the next 2 years.
On a similar vein, one of the bodies of work that was particularly of interest to many schools and non-government associations as well is the proposed decommissioning of the flexible learning options model and its replacement with a new model. Is that still the plan, or is that one of the matters that has been rolled out over a more extended period of time?
I'm told, member, there's been no change to the timelines and that we were always planning on consulting this year. And yes, and that is still the case.
Can I ask, what's the time frame then on that consultation? When will there be direct-to-stakeholder consultation to all interested stakeholders, and is there going to be broader community consultation as part of that as well?
Good question. I'm told currently underway, member for Morialta.
When will that consultation period conclude?
My understanding is it's an iterative co-design process, and they're looking to have, so Pam Kent is leading the work in relation to this, and that she's looking to have a first set of recommendations in relation to this ready in July of this year.
Thank you. And is the government going to create an education ombudsman?
No plans, I am told, member for Morialta.
A new position.
Haven't heard that question for a while. That brings back some memories, that one, I tell you.
Page 187. Can I go to the targets? I think this is referenced in about 5 places in the budget, but I'd like to talk about the Adelaide Botanic High School. So, one of the targets is listed as expanding the Adelaide High School zone, which is obviously in line with Labor's election commitment from 2024. Has the Minister received any advice in relation to pressures on the capacity of Adelaide High School and Adelaide Botanic High School to meet the needs of the population in its soon-to-be expanded zone? And can the Minister provide a commitment to those school communities that their special interest language, sports and health science programs will not be affected?
Thank you, member. And it's an important question. I might give a little bit of context, of course, first about the commitment that's been made to Adelaide Botanic High School and Roma Mitchell Secondary College, and of course to a number of suburbs in the member for Badco's area. Before the state election, then government made an announcement about $98 million in capital works funding for Adelaide Botanic High School to create an extra 700 places there, with construction expected to start in, I'm happy to say construction is still expected to start in September of this year. We're currently doing some work, which I'm sure the member is aware of, with the Adelaide City Council and the Parklands Authority to try to achieve a land swap. So there is no net loss of open space, given where the location of Adelaide Botanic High School is, and the land constraints that exist there, and the fact that it is to sit on the parklands. The other part to this expansion announcement was $21 million in capital works for Roma Mitchell Secondary College to increase capacity there by 300, with construction expected to start by March 2023. We matched those two commitments by the former government. The point of difference, of course, to which the member refers is the Royal We, the then Malnaskers Labor opposition, are now government committed to reinstating those suburbs and part suburbs, which had been cut back in 2019 from that shared zone. After some very strong advocacy from local members, including the formidable member for Badco. And we decided that given that this was a commitment to spend just shy of $120 million of taxpayers' money to expand these two great schools to the tune of 1,000 places, that the fair thing for us to do was to make sure that enabled those suburbs and part suburbs in that area which had been excised from the shared zone to come back in. Now, yes, that will create pressure on enrolment capacity at those two sites. The department is currently preparing the advice, I am told, which I intend to take to Cabinet about what those pressures might look like. I don't have that advice from them yet, but nonetheless we remain committed to meeting our election commitment made to the people in those areas and allowing them to have, again, the choice of sending their children to either Botanic High or Adelaide High. And I think it's important to note, and it will come as no surprise to people in this chamber, that many people who live in the CBD or the inner ring, I guess, around the shared zone make decisions and choices around the purchase of a house routinely based on making sure there is access in the long term for their children to go to those two schools. So we remain committed to meeting our commitment to having those suburbs come back in. I think by 2024 is when we have said that we will have those open again. The change zone will apply to new enrolments for the start of 2024, and Year 6 families in the areas will be able to register their interest in the first half of next year. And the work to which I referred, and which goes to the heart of the member for Moriella's question, around how that's implemented and what pressures it might bring to bear on the special interest programs. And I know there are very large ones at Adelaide High and smaller but not insignificant ones at Adelaide Botanic High School is being prepared at the moment, and I hope to receive that advice soon.
Member from Badco, you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Thank you very much for outlining that, Minister. As you are obviously aware, this is a matter of incredible interest to my electorate, and I was very pleased to be able to join parents across my electorate and also the member for West Torrens electorate to fight for the return of the city school zone, which they were promised many, many years ago. So thank you so much for the work that's being done on that. I understand you've just outlined that 2024 will be the year when enrolments begin again into that city school zone. I wondered if you might be able to provide some information or comfort to my community in relation to whether there are plans for consultation or engagement with families in my community ahead of that. Of course, many families have questions in relation to transition rearrangements and how the new zone will work. And I've, of course, been advocating for, as the plans come together, for that communication to happen with my community.
I thank the member for Badco for the question and thank her again for the advocacy that she provided, along with other members, including the member for West Torrens, who was an old scholar of Adelaide High School himself. And I'm pleased to, I guess, reiterate in no small part the answer I gave to the member for Morialta about our intention, our election commitment, which we will meet to allow the suburbs and part suburbs that cut across the seats of Badco and West Torrens, and they include previously zoned suburbs into the shared CBD zone of Glandore, Hilton, Coralta Park, Marston, Mile End, Richmond, Torrensville, Black Forest and Clarence Park. And we intend to commence work on the expansion of Adelaide Botanic High School, which will create an additional 700 places there in September of this year, so that is not long away, with a view to those places being live and in the system by 2024. The work to create an extra 300 places at Roma Mitchell Secondary College will commence, I think, in March of 2023. That is the other part of the the solution to increasing the capacity in and around the shared CBD zone to enable us to bring those suburbs I mentioned before back in. That work is starting in March of 2023, and we are pleased to be able to confirm with the member for Badco that enrolments and registered interest of enrolment from parents who wish to send their kids to either Adelaide Botanic High School or Adelaide High School. They will be able to start registering in 2023, so not far away. We are going to do some significant work, which I know the member herself has asked for, in terms of holding community information sessions around, because obviously there is an incredible amount of interest from those suburbs that were excised, which we have announced will come back in. We intend on doing work with those communities to explain how that will work, to make sure they are clear on how they express their interest in enrolments. And I look forward to having more to say on that soon, I hope. And again, thank the member for advocating for what I think is a great outcome, particularly for the suburbs in the seats of Badco and West Torrens.
Member for Moriata.
The Minister, in his earlier answers, identified the desirability of these schools for people in those suburbs, and of course the suburbs that have always been in the Adelaide High School zone or shared zone. I put it to the Minister that one of the reasons that these schools are so desirable is those special interest programs that are the core of what those schools see as their particular role within the public education system. My understanding of the Minister's earlier answer is that he's acknowledged that there are significant capacity pressures as a result of moving those suburbs back within the zone, and the Department is currently preparing advice which the Minister may take to Cabinet in relation to those special interest programs. Are there any other potential solutions on the table in relation to solving this capacity problem other than a reduction or complete cancellation of those special entry programs?
Thank the member for the question, and I think I'd like to say from the outset that yes, I accept and agree with the member that part of the attraction at those schools is and has been the special interest programs, and it is my desire as the Minister to, wherever we can, preserve those. I know the schools are keen on that as well. In terms of other solutions on the table, we will look at all options once I have that advice to which you referred from the agency. I think it has also, though, been a long-running issue in our system that we want to build the same kind of or similar kind of capacity for special interest programs like the ones that are run at Adelaide High and Adelaide Botanic High in schools outside the shared CBD zone. Certainly I would like to see that. I think given the incredible interest and enrolment pressure which has come to bear on Adelaide Botanic High School in a very short time after which it was built and opened, we could potentially, I guess, keep building schools in the CBD zone, and they may well keep filling up, but that's not necessarily a long-term answer in terms of having access to things like, well, I think Adelaide High School is languages, cricket and rowing from memory, and I think it's health sciences at Adelaide Botanic High School. But I know from the people I speak to in my community in the northeast that many of them would like to see similar specialist programs and offerings for their kids in other parts of the state as well. And I know the same is in regional areas. So I will do my utmost to preserve these for these schools, because I know that is the desire of the schools and the principals, and I accept the member's comment that it is in no small part a reason behind the attractiveness of those schools to families as well. We will look at whatever solutions the department might put on the table to me about how we can do that and meet our commitment to reinstate those suburbs back into the shared zone. But I also really want to focus my attention as Minister on how we can build a similar kind of capacity into the public education system to offer those kind of specialist programs in areas out of the CBD zone, so they might be accessible to a greater range of South Australian families.
The reinstatement of the suburbs in question to the Adelaide High School, Adelaide Botanic Shared Zone, will have a consequential reduction in the size of the zones for Unley High School, Plympton International College and Underdale High School. Will there be any consequential adjustments for those school zones expanding elsewhere other than these reductions, or is the government proposing to leave these schools with those reduced school zones?
Good question, Member for Morialta. I'm told there are no plans to make changes over and above the change which would enable the suburbs that I mentioned back into the shared CBD zone. But Mr Templey, as I'm sure you remember, is the guru, so to speak, on these matters. I might allow him to add a few extra comments to my answer.
So through the Minister, just confirming, yes, there's no other planned zone change as a consequence of expanding the CBD zone. We do monitor enrolment capacity and enrolment demands across the whole system continuously. We update our enrolment forecast twice yearly.
Microphone a bit more closely, please. Thank you.
So we do update our enrolment forecast on a 6-monthly basis to review where there's emerging capacity pressures across the whole system. Zone change is one policy response that we might consider, although it's a measure that we obviously don't take lightly because of the impact on parents and families. So not ruling out zone change at any point in the future, but certainly there's no planned contemplation of zone changes beyond the CBD shared zone at this point.
And if I could just add one more thing to that, the member for Badco will correct me if I'm wrong, but she's in regular contact, and I'm putting that mildly, with me about the school issues in her area. I'm pretty sure she may have informed me that Plympton International is currently at capacity, so I guess, I'm not saying that this applies to all those schools that the member for Morialta asked about, but in terms of that one at least, it might help us create a little bit more capacity to meet the existing demand there.
Yeah, my recollection is that it's only in the last few years that it's had that opportunity to have that broad subject choice in those senior secondary years, and I think that the students there have been enjoying it. Can the Minister identify whether the government then can give a commitment to families in the zones at schools like Henley High School, Brighton Secondary School, Seaton, Woodville, that are potentially adjacent to the school zones of these school zones in questions, that none of those families in Brighton, Henley, Seaton, Woodville or other schools will have their zones reduced?
No intention to change those zones, member for Morialta.
Are there any school zones around South Australia at primary school or high school level where the government is currently considering changing zones?
Member for Morialta, I'm informed there are currently no zone changes in addition to the CBD shared zone that are being contemplated.
Thank you. Can I take us to page 188, FTEs? And there's a mighty lot of them, as there should be. Can I ask, in relation to Labor's election commitment to increase, I'm quoting, to increase the percentage of permanent teachers by at least 10%, can the Minister advise the committee what are the parameters the government has set itself for achieving that commitment? For example, are we talking about between March 2022 and March 2026 to see that increase? What are how will the government determine whether or not it has fulfilled its commitment?
thank the member for the question, and I might give a little bit of context around this particular election commitment, which, as the member for Morialta correctly states, is to increase the percentage of permanent teachers by at least 10% to give greater employment certainty and, I guess, demonstrate our the way in which we value them and value the role that they play. But I might also add that the genesis of the commitment came about from discussions a number of us had for many years, primarily with principals who, and this won't come as news to the member for Morialta, felt a degree of frustration when a young, not always young, but it's a generalisation, but a young contract staff member in their school, for instance, who they would deem to be a star, had to make way for someone with permanency who was using their right of return to come back into that school, and they felt that they wanted the choice to be able to keep that person. So, although this announcement is in no small part about providing certainty for people who are stuck on contracts, who I think in the next few years more than ever before are going to really feel the pinch in terms of their ability probably to secure mortgages and things like that if they are, given what's happening with property prices and given that it's harder to do that when you are a contract teacher compared to a person with permanency. But it wasn't just about that, it was also about us trying to do what we could and use the levers available to us to try to reduce churn in the system, on the assumption, and of course we will test this, that if we had a higher level of permanency, there might be fewer instances, and this goes hand in glove with our commitment to extend the regional allowance, that there might be fewer instances where teachers choose to use a right of return, therefore less pressure being applied on principals to accommodate someone on that right of return and forego the services of a teacher on a contract that they would like to teach. What else can I say about that? In terms of the implementation, we're still working on that. That work is being done right now. I might pass over to Professor Westwell to add some more comments to my answer.
So in terms of the 10% increase, of course, what that does is it provides that certainty for teachers around employment, but also, excuse me, we want to make sure that those permanent teachers can have the biggest impact in the system. So we're currently providing advice on what that might look like, how that might be achieved, and what the timelines might be associated with that.
I appreciate the information. My recollection is that the department advised me when I was the minister that the number of teachers in the system who had permanency was in the order of 80%. Now, I'm wondering what advice the department has provided the minister, or whether the minister can just flat out tell us what is the percentage of teachers who are permanent in the public education system at the moment, or potentially the March 2022 date, the election date, would be the appropriate date on which that would be most useful.
I am told, Member for Morialta, that the percentage of permanency across the preschool and primary and secondary systems is 80%. But I will also note there is some conjecture from other stakeholders. The AEU is one of those, about whether that level is 80 or a lower level, but the advice I have from the department is 80% across school and preschool settings.
So, given that the commitment is for a 10% increase, it can be read one of two ways. We could be talking about 10% of the 80 or 10% from 80 to 90, but either 80 to 88% or 80 to 90%, presumably is the target the government has set itself by the time we get to the next election. Can the Minister confirm that is, which is the target? Is it to get to 88%, to get to 90%, or is the Minister preferring to hold off on setting a target until other stakeholders have made their suggestions to the Minister on how his target should be conceived.
My answer, Member for Morialta, is that the department will undertake policy work to identify where the level of teacher permanency can be increased. And the conversation I just had with the Chief Executive is that is somewhat complex in nature, while still maintaining flexibility for schools and preschools to manage their staffing needs. So I'm not going to give you a figure now, but there is work being done now, and I guess the announcement that we made was to state 10% for the obvious reason that because there is disagreement in some parts of the sector around whether the existing figure is 70 or whether the existing figure is 80, or there are other estimates I think that are given as well, that we provide evidence of our commitment to secure work and permanency for teachers by stating it as a 10% figure instead of stating it as a final figure. But I'm sure once that work is done, that there is more that we'll be able to say on that.
Does the government plan on maintaining all of the existing industrial entitlements available to permanent teachers as part of this push for permanency, in particular in relation to their entitlements around placement rights?
I'll let Professor Westphal provide some additional comments, but I can say that there's been no discussion from me in terms of, at any point in terms of reducing entitlements. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so there's no plans for any significant changes there, but we want to get that balance right between maintaining flexibility for schools and preschools to manage their staffing needs, as well as increasing that level of permanency. So those are some of the policy issues that we're working through right now.
When is the government going to commence formal negotiations in relation to the next EB?
So I'm told that the South Australian School and Preschool Education Staff Enterprise Agreement 2020 will nominally expire on the 23rd of March next year. The agreement will continue to be enforced until it's superseded by a new enterprise agreement, which is what the member is referring to, of course, or until it is rescinded. The last salary increase under the enterprise agreement was applied on the 1st of May this year. Under that, leaders received a 3.35% increase, and all other employees covered by the enterprise agreement received 2.35%. In terms of the specific question, though, from the member about when negotiations on a new agreement will commence, I think parties to in terms of the process that is generally applied here, parties to the enterprise agreement may commence negotiations for a new agreement 6 months prior to its nominal expiry, which is the 23rd of March.
And who will be the minister responsible for overseeing that negotiation?
Be the Minister for Industrial Relations, who is also the Minister for, or is also the Attorney General, who will be responsible for central management of enterprise bargaining across the public sector.
Thank you. I'll take you to page 187 and the target in relation to commence planning to implement the government's 7-point plan for quality teaching, etc., etc. Point 4 in that plan is that specialist subjects will be taught by specialist teachers, and I quote, "A Malinowskis Labor government will create a workforce plan that places teachers in subjects they are qualified to teach and creates incentives for teachers to gain qualifications in specialist subjects." What is being done to put that election promise into effect?
Thank the member for the question. And yes, this is one of the points in our 7-point teaching quality plan to increase the number of specialist teachers teaching specialist subjects. And again, it's an issue that is brought to my attention regularly, particularly in regional areas. It was brought to my attention just 2 weeks ago at Mount Gambier, I think, in relation to Mount Gambier High School from memory. It is not a new issue. It has been an issue under the last government and the government before that. I acknowledge that it is a particularly difficult one to fix, given the nature of South Australia in terms of being a very large state geographically with a very, a relatively small population. And that means that we do have schools in our regional and remote areas. We have schools with small numbers of students. I give a shout out here to Congarong, which I visited on the recent country cabinet, which has 26 kids. Specialist teachers, obviously not so much an issue at a primary school, but the challenge really is how do we offer the same consistency of courses or subjects in this case, regardless of where students go to school. How do we attract specialist teachers to be able to move to areas or stay in areas like that, or in some cases encourage them to study teaching and specialise and then move back to the regional area in which they grew up. So it is tricky, I know, probably in all jurisdictions in Australia, this issue, but I think in states like South Australia, I think it is particularly tricky to get this done. So in terms of answering the member's specific question, we're going to create a workforce plan with the aim in that, of course, of having more teachers who are actually qualified to teach in specialist areas. We've already had discussions on all the election commitments, and the department was quick to organise those sit-downs and longer conversations around how we envisage delivering on all the election commitments we've made, and the department has already turned its mind to how we do this. There are some immediate opportunities that have been pleasingly suggested or highlighted by the department in terms of how we particularly meet this one. The member for Morialta will, of course, be familiar with Orbis, which is down at Hindmarsh. I'm not sure what it used to be called, but it wasn't Orbis back in the day.
It's a new initiative that was started in 2019, I think.
Right, okay. I thought we always had training at Hindmarsh, but anyway, Orbis is a very impressive name. The Professional Learning Academy for Educational Leaders and Teachers. So the capacity of Orbis, of course, provides an opportunity for us to leverage that in-house training, I guess you can refer to it in some respects, is provided by the department to upskill teachers into having specialist subjects. That's one of the early opportunities that's been identified by the department. Designing and implementing a process to assess existing teachers, and this is something that I think I had a conversation with, it might have been at the highly accomplished lead teachers conference, I think, about the opportunities that exist with many teachers across our education system who already probably have specialist subject knowledge based on their pedagogical content knowledge, which would enable them to be a specialist teacher, but probably haven't been through the process to be categorised or qualified as such. So work that we can do in terms of acknowledging those expert and specialist skills that already exist in the system, which aren't acknowledged by specialist the specialist teacher moniker. So they're the two immediate pieces of action which the department has identified can be done in terms of getting on the front foot and delivering this. The department will also work to focus course intakes on subject specialisations aligned to this commitment and explore innovative models for specialist curriculum delivery. We are committed to delivering this in this term of government nonetheless, and I might ask if Professor Westphal, because it's probably a very area of interest to you, to add a few more things about how we will do this and the importance of doing it.
Yep. So it's certainly about making the most of the expertise that we've got in the public education system, recognising that, revealing that, making sure that we've got those educators teaching in those areas, and also about that recruitment of the future workforce and the strategy there. So I think that working with the initial teacher education providers to put emphasis in that area will be a focus for us as well. Where that's not possible, or while we're working on that, we also have got some fantastic examples in South Australia where schools are working together, where they've got specialist teachers to make sure that those specialist teachers can actually engage with a broader set of students. So the local delivery model in the Eyre Peninsula is one example of how schools are working in partnership to make sure that there are specialist teachers teaching in specialist subjects.
I appreciate all the comments from the Minister and the Chief Executive and their nuance. The election document didn't have as much nuance. I quote from it, it said, "Too often students are being taught by a teacher who hasn't trained in that subject. This must end. Mathematics should be taught by people qualified mathematics. This is the same for language, English and arts teachers." So the Minister talked about the plan that the department is working on, the workforce plan. When will that plan be finished and when will it be released? And will it have the ending of non-specialist maths teachers and non-specialist arts and language and English teachers as a KPI for that plan? Or is the department and the government now saying that it is possibly a bit more difficult than that?
I might pass over just briefly for an answer from Professor Westphal on this, but I think we're going to be taking probably the bulk of that question, a member from Morialta, on notice, and we'll come back to you with an answer.
Just pick up at the point about the qualified educators. One of the things that we know is that we've got primary educators, and while they might not even, when they go into primary education, they might not have a specialism, they might not have, for example, a degree in science, and yet, as professionals and through their professional development, what they do is they build incredible expertise, and we would consider those educators to be qualified to be specialist, for example, science teachers in primary schools. And that extends through to the middle years as well. And so really focusing on supporting those educators in the primary years and the middle years to become qualified teachers is a really important part of this. What we also know, for example, with the maths educators, is that people who may have degrees, for example, in mathematical disciplines like engineering or physics or something like that, that those people as well, while they might not have a mathematics degree, they are expert mathematics educators and bring a lot to the public education system. And so we're really focusing on how do we make sure that we're really using that capacity and developing capacity overall. So maximising that capacity, maximising the number of students who've got access to those kinds of educators, and understanding in our system who those educators are, how they're deployed, and how we might deploy them differently.
And just confirm the Minister will take the rest of the question on notice.
Shall.
Can I take us to Budget Paper 5, page 26, the local school infrastructure project? So I see Bill sitting in the background. I don't want him to be in any way feeling like we're not interested in his work. The item on page 26 talks about $26.6 million for school upgrades at 19 sites, including Avenues College 4 million, Westport Primary 4 million, and Yankalilla Area School 200,000, and is tantalisingly doesn't identify the other 16 projects. Can the Minister now provide a list of these projects and how much funding each is receiving?
Notice, come back to the member.
Can I ask if the government has determined which 16 sites are to benefit from this funding and how much funding each of those 16 sites is to receive?
I understand that we've got the amounts budgeted for each of those sites, and I think I'm almost certain they have all been publicly announced as well. But I'm happy to come back to you with.
Well, if they have been publicly announced, then can I ask, does that funding include, for example, $1 million for the Pines School for a new gymnasium?
We'll take it on notice. We'll come back to you with a list of the projects.
Does the funding include $3 million for Edwardstown Primary School?
We can do this on every one, but yes, I'll come back to you with a list.
Does the funding include $4.5 million for the Ceduna Area School Disability Unit?
I understand, my advice is that one is not on the list, but I am confident that we are close collectively to being able to announce a if I can call it a fix for that site.
We wish you well. Does the funding include money for Taylor and Ben Primary School and Coomanduk Area School to replace their very old transportable classrooms?
I'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
What's the status of the work at Kapunda High School following the devastating fire earlier this year?
Thank you, Member. An important question, and I was pleased to be joined by the Member for Morialta and the recently elected Member for Frome. I think it was the 30th of March, if I recall, or the 31st, because it was my birthday, and what a better way to spend it than inspecting the very sad ruins of a historical building, in this case the, I think, Aringa building. And I can give the member an update 56 on where things are at in terms of trying to rebuild that very important part of South Australia's history. So the fire was the 29th of March. It resulted in substantial damage to several buildings and ICT infrastructure, including Aringa, which is a heritage-listed building formerly owned by Mr Sidney Kidman, and I understand a couple of members at least of the current cabinet. I think the Minister for Tourism and Minister for Trade both went to school there and were in contact with me straight away after the news broke to talk about the significance of the building and why it was important that I went up there, which I did. The latest advice I have is that the cause is still unknown, but I can provide an update in terms of what we expect the remediation costs to be, and that's the current estimate is $15 million. The Financing Authority appointed McLaren's Holdings, which is a major loss adjuster, and Imparta engineers who have significant experience in the assessment and restoration of fire-damaged heritage sites, which, as the member for Morialta will know, is the real complication here. And I had a number of conversations with staff and community members about the significance of the building and some of the things that were lost in there, but also the incredible efforts that have been gone to in more recent years to bring it back to a state that closely resembled how Mrs. Kidman had it when they resided in the property. I think, and this goes to the tragedy of the fire, I think, too, is that some incredible bespoke works took place, right down, I think, to having tiles potentially manufactured to match the ones that Mrs. Kidman had put in place that could no longer be purchased to bring it up to spec. Now, that's all been lost, of course, but has provided a spanner in the works, so to speak, in terms of getting a quote and an accurate quote on what it will cost to rebuild it. But nonetheless, we are making progress. So the infrastructure which was lost was not just Aringa, of course, a general teaching and art building known as Building 14, home economics building known as Building 15. We're still waiting to hear from SAPOL and the Metropolitan Fire team about the cause of the fire. Building 14, which was the general teaching and art building, has now been demolished. Building 15, which was home economics, has been repaired and is being used by the school again. Cost to date for the clean-up and making Aringa safe, so it's not going to be a risk to anyone on the site, including some security to make sure that people don't come and cause more damage, are already over $160,000, which is a considerable cost in itself. The specialist task of cleaning up the damage and salvaging parts for reinstatement in line with engineering and heritage SA advice is expected to exceed $300,000. And works will begin once the State Commission Assessment Panel approval is obtained. But I guess we are committed, as I said on the day when I had a chance just to speak to the community, who were obviously deeply upset about what had happened, that we will rebuild as close to what was there as we possibly can. This government acknowledges the significance of the site, not just in terms of its importance to the school, but in terms of its significance to generations of people who have grown up in Kapunda.
Thank you. While we're on infrastructure, I've got some questions on page 181. There's a list of projects under the title Other Investment Projects. I think these are largely ones that were announced in last year's state budget. In relation to those projects, Eastern Fleurieu, Elliston, Morialta, Nailsworth, Pimpala, Salisbury East, Seaview Downs. I have a feeling there might have been one other, but I could be mistaken. I think there was, but at any rate. Can the Minister advise if there have been any changes to the time frame for the delivery of those projects since the election?
Member for Morialta, just make some reflections before handing over to Mr Glasgow to provide a bit more commentary. I'm told by Mr Bernardi that we can get a list for you, but I can say as Minister that I haven't, to the best of my knowledge, received any advice or briefings of changes to timelines to any of those projects, but happy to come back to you with a more solid answer. I have even better news. Mr Glasgow tells me they are still on target.
That's great. I know there's a significant drop in the budget for the Capital Works Assistance Scheme. Last year there were 858,000. This is the line below. Under annual programs. Last year there were $858,000 in funds made available for schools, and while that doesn't appear to have been fully subscribed by the estimated result, there is a pretty significant further drop to only $155,000 this year. My experience was this was a scheme that was pretty useful for schools and for the system, and I'm wondering if schools are being discouraged from applying for that scheme, or if there's some other explanation for that drop.
We'll take that on notice and come back to you with an answer.
Thank you. I note that $1.3 million has been budgeted for school bus replacement, down from $2.5 million spent last financial year. Has the department provided the Minister with any advice as to whether that will be sufficient to meet the needs of regional schools without further investment?
Thank you, Member, for the question and the perennial issue of school buses, which I don't think will ever go away in a state the size of South Australia. But as someone who went to my school on a school bus routinely from a country area, I certainly understand the importance of making sure they are there and can service communities large and small. The department's Transport Services Unit is responsible for administering about 429 buses in rural areas in accordance with the school transport policy. Of those 429, 65% are operated by school bus operators under contract with the Minister, and the remainder are operated by Department for Education-owned yellow school buses. These rural buses transport over 15,000 government, non-government and preschool children to and from schools and preschools on a daily basis, with the buses ranging in size from 21 seats to 57 seats. The school transport policy ensures that consistent, fair and equitable transport assistance is provided to all students across the state who are isolated by distance from a government school. The Transport Services Unit is also responsible for arranging transport, for instance, taxis, minibuses, hire cars for students with disability who attend a special school or a special class. Currently, there are 270 school transport services in operation, primarily around the Adelaide metropolitan area, that cater for roughly 101 students with disability. The department regularly undertakes reviews of the school bus routes to ensure the services operate efficiently and safely to achieve the best use of available resources, and the annual budget is $38 million. In response to your precise question, though, around the school bus replacement program and the difference there between the 21-22 budget of, I think, is at 1.3, and then it was an estimated result of quite a considerably larger amount of 2.574, and then back to a figure of 1.3, much closer to the budgeted figure for the last financial year. I might pass over to Mr Templey to add a bit more to my answer.
So just to add to the Minister's comments, so the department does have a planned bus replacement program. So we take into account the condition of the buses, but also the lifespan of buses, which differs depending on the bus size. So just last year we took delivery of 11 new 21-seat Toyota Coaster buses, with 6 more awaiting production by Toyota. 4 Mitsubishi Fuso Rosa 25-seat buses have also been delivered, and we've converted one of those for wheelchair use. We also have an approved replacement plan to replace the older vehicles into the future, which includes the purchase of the larger 57-seat buses and the continued replacement of the small buses each year, which I mentioned. The budget figures reflect expected replacement cost for the smaller buses. The replacement for larger buses is not reflected in those figures. Typically, in the past, we've taken a separate submission to Cabinet when we need to replace those larger vehicles.
Can the Minister identify how many of those larger vehicles are determined by the department to be in need of replacement over the next 4 years?
I'm informed the department is working on updated advice to me on that very issue now. I haven't seen that advice yet, though, Member for Morialta.
Can the, in relation to all of the investing expenditure, we've got the figures here for the 2022-23 budget, but my understanding is all of these projects, of course, have been through a process where there is, well, Cabinet's approved them, they're in the budget. Is the Minister able to provide, presumably on notice, a budgeted expenditure for each project for each year of the forward estimates?
Sorry, Member for Morialta. Could I have the start of that question again, if that's all right?
Can the Minister provide the budgeted expenditure for each project under the investing expenditure summary for each year of the forward estimates?
We'll take that on notice and get you a list. I understand for Mr Bernardi it's probably quite a long and detailed list, but we'll get that for you.
Yes, thank you. In relation to infrastructure works as a result of the voluntary mergers program, how many schools over how many sites have had expressions of interest over the last year, and have there been any valuations? Are you able to tell me which schools, if so?
Recognise the member for Playford, who's been waiting patiently.
Mr Morialta. Happy to provide some information for the member. So I guess my preliminary answer to you is that we the Royal We, myself and the team around me aren't aware of any new sites disposed of since I've become Minister, but we are going to check that for you. 2 sites were disposed of in the 21-22 financial year for, I think that's a combined total of $9.5 million. $0.1 million was spent maintaining closed sites in 21-22. 3 sites were acquired in 2021-22 for a total of just under $1,900,000. And of course, 1 site is expected to be acquired in 2022-23 for the expansion of Adelaide Botanic High School, but we will get you more specific details.
I'll go to member for Playford. I'll just advise the committee that the member McKillop has been asked to be discharged and will be replaced by the member for Schubert. Member for Playford.
Thank you, Chair. At the top of the page, in relation to Budget Paper 5, page 28, and the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library, can the Minister update the committee about funding for the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library?
Thank the member for Playford for the question. And Very happy to talk about the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library and commitments that this government made around supporting it and making sure that more families in the northeastern suburbs and surrounds are able to access the wonderful services that Lynn Turner, who is the guru and for many years the manager of the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library, offer to families. And I might say from the outset to the member for Playford that I think the services in terms of exceptionally low-cost loan of toys for children that the Toy Library provide, that is a premises which is inside the library at the Tea Tree Gully Council Chambers, have probably never been more important than they are now. And I know that's something that, a phrase that politicians like to bandy around all the time, but given the really acute cost of living pressures that families are feeling at the moment, petrol prices, I saw on the way in this morning, diesel well over $2, cost of fresh fruit and vegetables, property prices, a real issue with rental properties, being able to access them and the cost of them. It means that families find other areas to cut back on because they have to meet the essentials. And sadly for the children in those families, sometimes that means not having the same access to toys. And I don't mean the kind of frivolous stuff which you might buy and chuck away, but the kind of thing that the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library has in great abundance, which is educational things for kids from birth up to much higher years can play with and learn from. So the commitment that was made by the then Malinaskis Labor opposition during the campaign, when we managed to get the member for Croydon out to the Toy Library to have a look, and I was joined there by the members for Newland, that are now members for Newland and King, then candidates for those seats, was that we would increase and extend the government-based contribution to $50,000 if we were successful at the election. And we are now set to deliver on that commitment, and funding for the Toy Library has been included in the state budget. It will be provided until the 25-26 financial year. The extra funding, I am told, member for Playford, will allow the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library to establish a click and collect service, and we'll see the library operate for an extra half day each Monday. Now, that has been an issue that Lynn Turner has been raising with both political parties, and I think I acknowledge that the member for Morialta, I think, made a commitment in regards to Tea Tree Gully Toy Library as well, and I acknowledge that. But Lynn Turner has been talking for many years about what she has perceived to be an inability for the library to meet demand in terms of how often it is open. It is a very, very popular toy library. It is very well run. It is situated in a place that gets a considerable amount of foot traffic because people come to the Tea Tree Gully Council Chambers to have a coffee or to use the library there, the internet, hire books and movies and audio books, wander out to Civic Park and have a look around, go over to Tea Tree Plaza. It's well situated, which has meant that demand has continued to grow. So the funding that we are providing will enable the click and collect service. Of course, that's a method of buying and picking stuff up that has become increasingly popular during the pandemic, as probably most people in this chamber have done a bit of the click and collect. I think there was a lot of click and collect happening at Dan Murphy's through the pandemic, that's for sure. But this will enable that service to run as well as extending the opening hours. The Tea Tree Gully Toy Library has been open since 1979, which is an incredibly long period of time. It has traditionally met its operational costs through a combination of fundraising activities, membership fees, which are very small, I can tell you, and in-kind support from the City of Tea Tree Gully. And we know how important the early years are, Mr Chair. Toy libraries like the Tea Tree Gully Toy Library give children access to a much wider range of toys than they would otherwise have. I might say also, if I could give a plug for the environment here, it is good for the environment. It means instead of buying all the kids all the toys, we can have some which are loaned, and then when the child no longer wants to use them or has outgrown them, instead of chucking them in the bin, they are there for future generations of young people to use as well. The library caters to children from newborns to 12 years of age. Membership for a family is $35 a year, but you are able to have unlimited loans for that, as long as there's up to 3 toys at once for 4 weeks at a time. I'm very pleased that we have able to deliver this a commitment early in the piece because, as I said, cost of living pressures are considerable at the moment. This will help with that and make sure that the Tea Gully Toy Library provides a fantastic service for generations of people living in the northeastern suburbs.
Member for Moriarty.
Thank you, sir. I'll take you to page 188, the overarching expenses line. Can the Minister advise if the new government will continue the work underway as part of the department's music education strategy?
Thank the member for his question and acknowledge his interest in this program when he was Minister, and I think probably when he was the Shadow Minister formerly as well. It is an important part of our offering in schools. I am not a person who is musically gifted, sadly. Other people in my family are, but I didn't get those skills. But I acknowledge its importance. And the education strategy to which the member for Morialta refers comprises of 7 FTEs, a manager, a senior project officer, 1 project officer and 4 music education network field officers. On the 30th of November in 2018, under the then Minister's tenure, the Department of Education launched the 10-year music education strategy, which is aimed at ensuring all children and young people in South Australia have access to a high-quality music education. The strategy aims to enhance existing systems and build capacity to provide better support for general classroom music education, upskill non-specialist teachers and educators to improve the delivery of general classroom music education, and provide curriculum resources with a strong focus on primary schools as well. A South Australian quality music education framework was launched in 2020, defining a set of characteristics for quality music education and providing guidance to a range of stakeholders who are involved in making decisions about music education. 4 rounds of the Music Innovation Fund have now been completed. $1,027,761 has been allocated to 106 schools, 37 preschools and 10 external organisations. A variety of programs and initiatives are also underway, including the delivery of professional development courses, provision of online music education resources and classroom instruments, student pathway opportunities and new music education curriculum resources. In terms of the member's specific question, though, which I understand was in relation to the ongoing operation and function of this strategy, we don't have any changes planned. I certainly don't have any changes planned as the Minister, and probably would refer to my opening statement about my intention to do my best to, wherever I can, to meet the priorities that we have made as election commitments and deliver the vision that we set out before the election, but also keep those things with which former governments of all colours have put in place, and I would firmly put this in that category.
Thank you, Minister. That was an excellent answer. Commend you. Is ongoing funding guaranteed? I'll give it an A. No. Is ongoing funding guaranteed to continue to support the Primary Schools Music Festival as it enters its 131st year?
And this is a fantastic festival. I'm pretty sure I could look to a staff member who attended that with me. I think I went to that last year with you.
We were sitting next to each other.
We were. Of course, I remember that. Of course, we had a good old time. But it was impressive, and I had a local school, at least one, and the thrill they got from being part of that spectacle, I got to say, was amazing. And it's one of those things, I think, even in my time working in the portfolio as a staffer, I don't think I ever got to attend it, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to see when I went on the occasion with the member for Morialta, the then Minister, but was blown away by the extent of the spectacle and what's put on. And certainly the feedback I got from the local schools in my area who were part of it, they loved it. The parents absolutely loved it. I think parents who might be trying to decide where their children might go to primary school, who see the splash that appears on social media from those schools in their area who compete, it would be a real incentive for them to send their kids there. It is a wonderful thing.
Thank you. I'll take you to page 186, the highlights in relation to Clontarf academies. Can the Minister confirm the new government will fulfil the department's commitments to Aboriginal students engaged with Clontarf academies around South Australia? I note the budget line confirms there's a 3-year agreement to continue the 7 academies established during the term of the previous government, with the potential to establish up to 8 more. So will those 7 that are currently in place continue, and is the government going to continue looking at the establishment of further academies?
Thank the member for the question, and I think I had the first interaction I had, I think, from Clontarf might have been at Port Augusta Secondary, I think, in 2021 when I went up to do a bit of a tour of the area, and that was one of the schools that I went to, and Clontarf was operating there, and certainly the school and the leadership there spoke very highly of the work that Clontarf does. Certainly an area of focus for this government, and will be an area of focus for me, and there are a range of programs, of course, most of which the member for Morialta will be very familiar with, that are designed to do work in this space. I'm just trying to see whether I have any information specifically on Clontarf. I don't think that I do, but I know that there have been no conversations that I have been a part of to consider any changes to the existing contract to which you refer with Clontarf. In terms, though, of the second part to that question, member for Morialta, about whether or not we would consider any expansion, always open to that. I don't think anyone has approached me about it yet. I'm sure that time will come.
Thank you. There's a line underneath in relation to the Shooting Stars program in Whyalla, and can the Minister confirm similarly that that work is still underway to pilot the Shooting Stars program in Whyalla for Aboriginal girls?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Can I take you to page 188, the overarching expenses line again? Will the new government continue to provide support in relation to the International Baccalaureate Diploma pathway for senior secondary students at Unley High School, Nord International High School, Aberfoyle Park High School and Roma Mitchell College? I'm particularly asking about financial support that enables the coordination and delivery of those IB diploma programs.
Might allow Professor Westwell to answer this question.
There's no plans to make any changes to that programme at the moment. I think it provides an additional part of the education system, and of course one of the things that it also provides is a focus on languages, which remains a priority for the department to support languages across the whole system.
Thank you. Can I ask the Minister, in relation to Budget Paper 5, page 26, the $100 materials and services charge subsidy, how many students in our public education system are on school card and how many are not and would therefore be eligible to attract the subsidy?
So, a little bit of context, and then I will answer the member's question as specifically as I can. The school card, obviously incredibly important, which enables families who are eligible to forgo the payment of materials and services charge at the school of their choice. The current gross annual school card limit income, which has been updated, of course, from 2021. If there is one dependent child, roughly $62,500 as the gross annual income limit. 2 children, $63,500, 3, $64,500, 4, $65,000, closer to $66,000, 5, just shy of $67,000, and then for each additional dependent child on that limit can raise by $1,115. It's also broken down into a weekly school card income limit, but I won't go into that. So that's the context, and I know when Labor was last in government, one of the things that we did was to raise those limits, and whilst I have am not contemplating doing that, and we don't have an election commitment to do it, I note that given the earlier comments I made around cost of living, and I think most people would be shocked to think that there are so many people who are trying to subsist on such small gross annual incomes of $62,500, or in the case of 4 dependents, $65,785. So I acknowledge it's incredibly important that we have a school card offering. In terms of the number of people approved for the 2021 school year, there were 54,562 government students approved for school card assistance.
So presumably about 120,000 who aren't and who will receive the subsidy therefore?
Well, whether or not they all access it, we of course don't know that. I understand that is what is budgeted.
Can I ask, has the Minister received advice as to whether this expenditure, which is eligible to be applied towards South Australia's required contribution towards the National School Funding Agreement, towards public school resources?
Might pass over to the Mr. Chris Bernardi to answer this question.
Hi. Yep. So we're estimating, as we said, $12 million for 2 years for the 2022 school year, as well as $12 million for the 2023 school year only. So that's around that 120,000 student number. So the way that and what we're assuming is, because that's a discount to parents, eligible parents, that the payment that we're going to be making, schools will not be out of pocket. So whatever rebate or discount the school gives to a family, that we'll reimburse that school in total. So from our perspective, that cost that the school uses the revenue for is to meet the educational cost of students in our system. So on that basis, our subsidy to parents, we're saying that is an eligible cost to meet the cost of educating students in our system.
Can I have one more?
Ooh, I'll be nice to you.
It's kind of early childhoodish
Okay,
too.
that's okay. Go ahead, quickly.
Will the new government continue to support the Literacy Guarantee Unit in the Department's Curriculum and Learning Directorate, and the delivery of the Year 1 phonics check has been underway for the last 4 years?
I understand the answer is yes to both.
Outstanding.
And could I, before the Chair does his important work, invite all members to morning tea in the Members' Lounge. That's the proper Members' Lounge for House of Assembly members. There will be scones.
Allocated time having been expired, I declare the exam